Good morning. We're on lesson 15 this morning. Genesis basically 32 through 36. We're going to skip chapter 34 and talk about it Wednesday evening. Have one or two things to kind of pick up from chapter 31, but it's all part of the same storyline. So hopefully it won't take anything away from the class this morning. It's good to see everybody. Hope you're having a good weekend. Appreciate your presence. If you're visiting, I don't right offhand see any visitors. But if I'm missing you and you're visiting, man, that's just the worst thing in the world, isn't it? We're glad to have you. Appreciate you being here. Hope everything's well with you. Invite you, if you have questions or comments as we go through our study, to please feel free to offer them. I know it's a big room and some people are uncomfortable speaking up in an auditorium, and I get that. But if you've got a question or comment, please feel free as we go through the morning. Charles, would you mind leading us in a prayer as we get started? Amen. Okay, we're kind of in the middle of the story of Jacob, Israel, who is, to me, maybe the most intriguing of the three patriarchs that we study about in Genesis: Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He is intriguing because in many ways he does not strike me as a man who has much faith in God. In fact, of the three patriarchs, it seems to me that he makes the most changes as he goes through his life in regards to his relationship to God. And maybe that's the point. I don't think that he is intended to be a parallel to the nation of Israel, but you think about it somewhat. Moses is writing this, and we don't know exactly when in his life Moses wrote the first 5 books, but obviously, he's writing them sometime between the journey from Mount Sinai to the plains of Moab, where he's about to go into the Promised Land. And so, as he is writing, I'm kind of assuming during those 38, 40 years of wilderness wandering, as he is writing, he's writing to a group of people who had spent 400 years living in Egypt. Even though they knew about the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, how much of the oral tradition and stories from the patriarchs had actually been passed down to these families? I could see it happening in the first couple of generations, but you think 300 years later, where you've gone from 75 people to 1 or 2 million, I mean, how much do you know about your family background? And I recognize it was more important to them than it is to us, but they would have been a people when Moses came on the scene that, in my opinion, probably had very little knowledge of God. There were some, and there were some people faithful, but on the whole, here's a group of people that are having to learn about Yahweh. They're having to learn faith. And in many ways, it seems to me that Jacob kind of parallels that. Here's a man that's having to learn faith. Even though his father and his grandfather were people of great faith, and he is a man who learns to trust in God, he's learning to trust in God. I don't think it was something that he started off with, and you see that as the story goes along, beginning with especially God's appearance to him in Bethel. And so in the last few chapters, he has gone to Haran, to Padan Aram, in order to take a wife from Moses' brother's family. And so Rebekah's brother Laban is who is kind of the patriarch in that family at this point. And so Jacob goes up there, and as we were finishing Wednesday night, we were talking about how he came to to not steal Laban's possessions, his flocks, but in many ways end up with a stronger, a more prosperous herd than his father-in-law had. And I'm not going to go back over all the putting the staffs, the rods in the troughs and all that stuff, unless somebody wants to right quick. The point that is made is, as you end the chapter, as you end chapter 31, and the chapter just before, Jacob has prospered. Laban's level of prosperity has decreased. Laban's sons become concerned. Jacob becomes concerned. And so the last couple of questions in the last lesson have to do with what happened there. Jacob asks permission to leave, but first he prays to God about it, which is a kind of a step for him, it seems to me, that he looks to God for direction. And then he goes to Rachel and Leah, and he explains to them, look, your dad's changed my wages repeatedly. God told me if I came down here, he would bring me back. And I just think it's time to go, and they are encouraging of that. In fact, their response is kind of interesting. If you look back in chapter 31, you'll notice that verse 14, Rachel and Leah say, is there still any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not considered strangers by him? He has sold us and completely consumed our money. Laban may be a much shadier character than we maybe assume him to be. We see him get the better of Jacob repeatedly. But clearly Rachel and Leah feel like, well, he's basically treated us like slaves. Now, I don't know if he just, sent them off with Jacob, offered no bride gift. I think there's a kind of a dowry that would have been paid to the family, and then a bride gift that would have been given to the bride so she can start off. If you ever see the movie Quiet Man with John Wayne, that's the whole premise of the whole movie, is the bride gift. And so that's a very old tradition. I don't know what their gripe is, but they don't like the way their dad's treated them either. So basically they say, we're with you, let's get out of Dodge. And so they pack up. They are 3 days removed, remember, the flocks from feeding one another. So Jacob takes his wife and kids and flocks and leaves. And 7 days later, Laban catches up with them. What does God do here to kind of intervene in all this activity? Anybody remember? Okay, he tells Laban, you better be careful. If I remember right, he doesn't actually say, don't touch him. What he says is, yeah, you better be careful is basically what he says. What God says to Laban, and Laban gets it when he catches up with Jacob. He says, okay, the only reason that I don't take you to task is because your God has appeared to me. And the thing that exacerbated this, and I'm kind of going through the last couple of questions here, was that when they leave, what does Rachel do? Anybody remember? She steals the family gods. She steals the idols. And you add all this together, I'm wondering if she's going, hey, there's some serious gold or silver in these little figurines right here. We didn't get a bride gift. We got sold off like slaves. We don't get any inheritance, so we're taking this, which is kind of interesting to me. And obviously, you remember the story. Laban catches up. He can't find it anywhere. Jacob becomes pretty emboldened and takes him to task and just basically tells him off for all of his abuse and his misuse and the way that he's treated Jacob and all of these things. And finally, they come to a covenant where essentially they say, okay, we won't cross here. And I think the idea probably is we won't cross this point to do you harm, and you don't cross this point to do us harm. And you see that covenant 2 or 3 times in the Bible story where a boulder or a rock or a pile of stones, a cairn, is set up that is intended to remind everybody, I'm not going to pass this right here in order to do violence against you. So that kind of ends the story of Jacob and Laban, and Laban really doesn't come to play anymore after that. I do want you to appreciate this about Laban, and I think this is why God gives us so much information. Jacob meets his match in Laban. Jacob has, as best we can tell, fulfilled his name. He has been a deceiver, a supplanter. He's gotten the birthright. He's gotten the blessing. I don't know what all he's done, but he seems a man who's pretty good at manipulating people and circumstances in order to get his way. But when he meets Laban, suddenly the shoe's on the other foot. And if you don't look at this fairly carefully and think it through, I think you can miss that. And as we come to this section, beginning in chapter 32, as Jacob and Laban part, and Jacob and his wives and children meet Esau and move on back into the promised land, this event where Jacob is wrestling with the angel is intended, I think, to play upon the way Jacob has been and what his life has been like. And then we'll talk about that a little bit as we move on. So, questions or comments about the end there, about the issue with Jacob and Laban? Anybody? Okay, good. As long as you don't ask about the rods and the troughs, we're good to go. Chapter 32 to 36, and this is lesson number 15, and so number 1. When Jacob comes into the vicinity of the promised land, and if you look on the map at this point, you see the little, see Bethel and Shechem, everybody? Just to the right of that, as you're looking at it, it's the Jordan River, and that little blob at the top is the Sea of Galilee. Everybody familiar with that for the most part? If you go to the east of that, right up there would be just south of the Sea of Galilee and back to the east, there's a river called the Jabbok, J-A-B-B-O-C-K, that flows into the Jordan. And that area back to the east is a high, where I grew up, we would have called it a mesa. It's a high plain, fairly fertile, and that's where, for instance, Gad and Manasseh, and Gad and Asher and half the tribe, Ephraim, Gad, and not Ephraim, Gad, Manasseh, and half the tribe of, it's not half the tribe, it's half the tribe of Manasseh, it's Gad and Naphtali, and half the tribe of Manasseh are going to settle on that side because they are herdsmen, so it's a great place if you've got cattle. Menahem would be just a little north of the Jabbok that goes, if you've got a map in your Bible, it's probably going to be a little more detailed. When Jacob gets there, and he's coming all the way from up in that vicinity of Haran, so this is a long trek that he has made. When he gets to Menahem, we are told that angels meet him there. And so the question, and we're not told much about it, just that angels meet him there. So here's the question. Why does God tell us this, and what's the significance of that?
I think it probably assures Jacob that God is with him as he meets Esau. That's something to do with that.
Yeah, I think probably, because this prefaces the story of Jacob meeting Esau again. Jacob knows if he goes back to the promised land, he's going to have to deal with his family. In fact, God told him to go back to his family, not just to the promised land. You go back to your family. And especially focuses upon Bethel, which will come into play here in a chapter or two. And so Jacob's thinking all this through. If I go back to my family, where did Abraham and Isaac basically live most of their days? And Canaan is too broad an answer. Where did they live for the most part? If you were going to pick one place on that map that you're looking at, where did basically Abraham and Isaac spend more of their time? In the southern end, down in Beersheba. In fact, when Jacob finally catches back up with Isaac at the end of this lesson, Isaac is in Hebron, which is still, they all lived in the south, okay? Edom is just across what would be the southern Jordan Valley as it goes on down towards the Sinai Peninsula. Edom's that area. If Jacob goes back to his family, he's going to be going back in the vicinity of where Esau lives. Okay? And God has told him, but God's told him nothing about that. So he's on his way back down there, and as he gets close to the land of Canaan, these angels, I don't know how many there are, there are enough of them that when Jacob sees them, he says, this is God's camp. You know, and there may be a dozen, there may be, multiples of 10. I don't know. It is interesting. Jacob calls Mahanaim, that name, because it means two camps. He's got his big camp, and here's the camp of angels. And I think Larry's right. Probably it's God's message that, I told you, if you went off and came back, I would protect you. And I'm still going to protect you, because Jacob's worried that what's going to happen when he meets Esau. He's going to kill him. That's been 25 years, or 20 years, but he still thinks Esau's going to kill him. And there's, as far as we know, no reason for him to think otherwise. So that's where he goes, and I think that is the likely reason that God sends these angels. Now, stop right here for a second. Who's writing all of this? Moses. Who were the first ones likely to read all of this? The children of Israel, before they go into the land of, I'm assuming Moses finished it before he died. Okay, everybody got that? Agree with that? And so they're about to go into the land of promise, and what has God told them He's going to do when they go into the land? He's going to take care of them. Why are little bitty 2-verse incidents like this important? Well, we look at it and go, well, it's a curiosity. God's going to take care of Jacob. It's not just about God taking care of Jacob. It's about God taking care of Israel. And if God took care of Jacob and God took care of Israel, what does that say for us? God's not asking us to go all over the country and kill people. He's just asking us to be faithful and to have the guts to be different instead of just being like all the Canaanites around us. And He has left us ample evidence that He's going to take care of us. That's the point. So, number 2 is basically a geography, because these cities come into play. I told you where Mahanaim is, and Edom would be down, you see on the map Sodom, Edom would be south of there, and maybe just a little back to the east. Where is Bethel? Yeah, right there. Thanks, Tracy. This is what I live with all the time. Bethel would be kind of in the middle part of the land of Canaan. Okay? If the northern boundary of Canaan at this point is essentially the Sea of Galilee, it's going to be farther than that eventually. But let's just say, for argument's sake, Sea of Galilee to the bottom of the Dead Sea, everything over to the Mediterranean, from the river of Egypt, basically to Mount Carmel, which would be almost due west of the Sea of Galilee. That's the Promised Land. Okay? Bethel's kind of in the middle. It's interesting, the patriarchs for the most part don't live in that area. It is more populated. That's where the cities tended to be. That's as you go towards the Mediterranean, there's probably a little more moisture. The steppe lands are probably a little more fertile. In fact, Galilee in the New Testament, northern kingdom in the Old Testament, is a very fertile area. And the reason I think the patriarchs don't stay there is because it's just more populated. You just run into more Canaanites when you're there. Okay? But that's where Bethel is, where God and Jacob are going to affirm again the covenant. And then Beersheba is where? Yeah, at the very south, where Abraham tended to settle, where Isaac spent a good bit of his time. And this is going to be close to Esau. So, number 3. Jacob sends messengers and tells Esau, I'm coming home. And what's Esau's reaction, first of all, to the messengers? Gets up and goes to meet them with 400 men. Yeah, so, I mean, he doesn't say there's not any indication that he sends any big message. Just, I'm coming, and the messenger say he's coming. He's got 400 men with him. What would you assume? Yeah, I'm about to die, okay? I'm about to die. My kids, I've got 11 sons at this point, and they're all kids, okay? Just remember, they're all kids at this point. And so, at any rate, Jacob is somewhat distraught. So what does Jacob do? What's the first thing Jacob does? And I think this is very telling. He prays to God. Now, how old is Jacob at this point? Yeah, maybe he's probably close to 100. Okay, he's been 26 years or 20 years in Haran. Okay, so he's probably close to 100, in his at least mid 90s. And again, it's hard for me to see him that age, but I have a hard time finding anything that leads you to any other conclusion. And now maybe for the first time, what we're seeing is when things are happening to him, he's looking to God, which has not been the case in the past. But he's learning, and that's the point. And that's a good point for us, folks. You learn about God as you go along, and not necessarily just when you're young. In fact, I would propose a lot of times we don't really pay much attention to God until we get a little bit older. That's one of the difficulties of teaching young people. It's not that they're incapable, it's just that either they don't see as much need for God, or they're too distracted, or maybe it's the influences in their life, in their family, in their community. But it seems to me a lot of times we don't start paying much attention to God till we start getting a little older. And that's when our faith really starts maturing. When we get old enough in life to start looking around and realize, hey, God may providentially been involved in this right here, or I see this, or I didn't think about this before. All of a sudden, quote unquote, religion becomes practical. And so here's Jacob as an old man, and he prays to God, God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, Yahweh who said to me, notice this, return to your country and to your family, I will deal well with you. Remember, he essentially calls God to fulfill His promise, which is okay. Don't we do the same thing? Every time we ask God to forgive us, when we render ourselves obedient in baptism, are we not calling on God to fulfill what He has promised us to do? And so, but here's the interesting part. Verse 10, I'm not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of truth that you've shown your servant. I crossed over the Jordan with my staff and have become two companies. So I pray, deliver me from the hand of my brother. I fear him, lest he come and attack me and the mother with the children. You said, I will surely treat you well and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which can't be numbered for multitude. It is an impressive prayer to me, especially where he comes from. And so that's the first thing he does. Now then, he also acts. What else does he do in preparation for his brother coming? Yeah, he divides his camps. So if one gets slaughtered, maybe the other will get overlooked. And what else does he do? Yeah, he said, I'm going to present a gift. And so, and we're going to come back to this, he separates flocks and herds and sends them out kind of in a spaced out parade to try to win Esau's favor as Esau comes toward him. And so that takes us then to number 4, the scheme that Jacob adopts in order to oppose Esau. I want you to think about this. 200 female goats and 20 males. That's the beginning of a pretty decent living right there. 200 200 ewes and 20 rams, and then 30 milk camels with their colts, and then 40 cows and 10 bulls, and then 20 female donkeys and 10 foals in sequence. And, Jacob's pretty sharp dude, I'm going to find a way to appease him. And so that takes us then to the most interesting part. In some ways, one of the most interesting parts of Genesis to me, and that's the end of chapter 32. We get to verse 21, And he sends all this stuff out ahead of him because Esau's coming all the way up from down in the vicinity of Sodom there. And he sends his wives and children over the brook Jabbok. He's not crossing the Jordan here. He's moving them south. And for whatever reason, he doesn't go with them that night. I don't know why. I don't know if he's praying. That's almost a reasonable conclusion at this point. I don't know if he's scared to death and thinks, I'm going to separate myself from all of them and they'll all die and I'll get away. That might be the case as well. But whatever the reason, this is the point at which, verse 24, a man wrestles with him until the breaking of day. Man, I wish I had more information about this. Where does this guy show up? How do they start arguing? You don't just walk up to somebody and attack them. And yet, here's a wrestling match that essentially goes on for hours. For hours, through the night until the breaking of day. The fascinating part is, in verse 25, when he saw that he did not prevail against him, the he is the angel. I'm going to say this is an angel. Okay, but when you read Hosea chapter 12, Hosea addresses this. And as the story goes on, there seems to be the possibility that this is a manifestation of God. Okay? And just to foreshadow, if we're going to eventually, I think beginning of next year, go on into Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. In Exodus, you have the angel that's guiding the children of Israel through the wilderness. And at times, the angel appears to be God. At other times, the angel appears to be speaking for God. And that's always been a curiosity to me. And I don't have a good answer, but that's the same thing going on here. Okay? At the very least, this angel is speaking and acting on God's behalf. Okay? And so they wrestle, but the angel does not prevail against Jacob. Which says something about Jacob. I mean, he may have spent a lot of time in his youth in tents, but he must have been doing some wrestling when he was in those tents. Because they go all night, and the angel doesn't prevail, and so he touches the socket of his hip, or strikes the socket of his hip, and his hip is dislocated. Why? I mean, is this like an over-competitive angel? What's the point of doing that? Yeah, Suzanne?
When it says that he didn't prevail against him, it just really means that Jacob never quit, never gave up, because obviously the angel of God had been favorized and things how he wanted to. And this was just a demonstration of that.
I think that's exactly it. Jacob appears to prevail. The angel, he says he prevails, which means he's winning the wrestling match. But the angel kind of reminds him, look, anytime I want to. And I think that's what's going on here. I really do. And if you look at verse 26, it's the angel who says, let me go. And Jacob must have some concept of who he's dealing with. Because I'm not going to let you go unless you bless me. Now, that might be just because he recognizes this as some powerful man, but there's just more going on here. And so he asked Jacob what his name is. Jacob says, Jacob, and he says, you'll no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. You've struggled with God and men and have prevailed. Do you think at this point Jacob goes, I kind of wondered if maybe you were a representative of God? And this is not the first time Jacob's dealing with angels in his life. God has intervened in Jacob's life a number of times now. And so Jacob's reply is, tell me your name. And the angel, and they are hesitant to do so, as you see in the scripture. You see it with Samson's parents. And he blesses him. And so Jacob calls the name of the place Peniel, which means the face of God, because he says, I've seen the face of God and my life was preserved. So the question is, what's the point of all this? First of all, why is Jacob renamed? He doesn't really, he gives us part of it here. The angel says, I'm going to call you Israel from now on because what? Yeah, you fought with man and God and you have prevailed. And yet, What does the name Israel mean? Anybody have it in your margins? Some margins will include it. Prince of God. Okay. What did you say, Larry? Persevere? Okay. Okay. Well, it's probably one of those deals where it has more than one name. God's going to rename him again here a little bit later when he gets to Bethel. Interestingly enough, he's Jacob throughout almost the remainder of Genesis. He's not called Israel very often, but eventually. There's double meaning here. One of it is you're going to be a prince in God's house, but part of it here is the idea of overcoming struggle. You have struggled with man, you have struggled with God, and you have prevailed. And you look at Jacob's life, and this is really, to me, the point of this whole section, is this, the wrestling with the angel represents Jacob's entire life. He was, as kids, when he was born, he was seen as a supplanter to his brother, grabbing hold of his heel. It is the projection of the young men as children as they are described to us. We see it in the stealing of the birthright. We see it in the stealing of the blessing. We see it as he goes to Bethel the first time and basically bargains with God. Okay, you take care of me and I'll worship you when I come back. Then he goes to Laban, and for 20 years he struggles with Laban. Rachel and Leah and the handmaids, there's a struggle there. They're always arguing and fighting. Don't you know Jacob got tired of the drama in his life? And he only had one daughter, okay? And yet, it was just drama in his life. And that's one of those things you kind of have to think about, these things happening to Jacob as he goes along. And now he's coming back and he's about to go into the promised land. What's he going to be struggling with in the promised land? Huh? He's going to struggle with Esau again. He's going to struggle with the Canaanites and the inhabitants of the land. And essentially the message that God offers him here is, you've spent your whole life struggling. And you're finally starting to see where the real struggle is. It's with me. And you're starting to figure it out. You're starting to turn to me. You're starting to pray to me. You're starting to trust me. Now, it's not complete yet, as we're going to see in the next couple of chapters. But I think that's the point of Jacob wrestling with the angel, and the angel saying, I'm going to rename you. And we're going to see that all confirmed. And that is fascinating to me. In many ways, it's the story of the children of Israel. And in many ways, it's our story, isn't it? Have you ever struggled with God? Huh? You ever doubted? You ever see circumstances of life? You ever, my life's full of drama. There's just something always happening. Every time I turn around, somebody I love, somebody in my family, some death, some illness, some problem. And I just feel like life is a struggle. And why is God letting this happen to me? And why is all this? And do you not think that Jacob is in some ways all of us? And I think it's a very powerful lesson, and one that's very subtly presented. God just doesn't come out and say, Jacob had a lot of problems, I saw him through. You have to read it and think it through and see it and back up and look at the big picture to appreciate it. But buddy, if that does not offer you some consolation in your own struggle with God, I'm not sure what's going to. Phyllis, you want to say something? No, I think it was physical. Yeah, it says he appeared to him, and he certainly dislocated his hip. Okay, that injury is very clear. And then the interesting thing about that is Jacob's going to carry that reminder for the rest of his life. He will never forget what happened at Peniel because of that. Ken, you want to say something?
I think you said it really well, but also emphasizes this happened at a real important time.
Yes.
I mean, it could have happened at a lot of other times during Jacob's life, right? But right before he's about to see his brother.
And to go into the promised land and deal with the next conflict that's coming. Again, what a lesson for the children of Israel. I mean, it's fascinating to me. Sam?
I think
Yeah. He doesn't offer necessarily to fix them all. Just that, yeah, I'm going to take care of you. And that's all he really promised Jacob at this point. I'll take care of you. George?
I just want to say that, I mean, it seems clear that Jacob didn't really trust that God was going to save him because of everything he did to protect himself.
Yeah. I think you're right.
And so this was, I mean, so the final thing when the angel or God tells him you fought against man and God and prevailed, that's a confidence.
It is.
A note to him saying, you've got nothing to worry about.
Yeah. Everybody hear what George said? He said that he's always backing his play. He's got faith in God, but he's also doing other things. And at this point, when God tells him you've prevailed with man and God, it is a mark where Jacob should have some confidence that God's going to take care of him. It's a good observation. I also think you're right. We all have our faith, but we still sometimes try to act and cover all of our bases too. And you really see that in Jacob's life. He is much more like all of us than I think we sometimes think about Jacob being. So as we move along then, they meet. Esau's reaction is surprising. What does Esau do? Yeah, happy to see him, cries, weeping, tries not to accept the gifts. Here's interesting to me. What's Jacob's reaction? Yeah, I mean, he offers this gift, but what does he do? They do cry, but this is mentioned more than one time. What physical gesture does Jacob assume as he bows down to him? And when he brings his wives and children, everybody's bowing down. What's ironic about that? It's really the other way around. And God said, both before they were born, in the blessing of Isaac, your brothers are going to bow down. All your family's going to bow down to you. I just find this kind of interesting that Jacob, he's got the birthright, he's got the blessing, he knows God's with him. What does that say about him, do you think? Do you think it's just fear? Or what else has he learned besides faith? Okay, there is an honor thing. I heard somebody back here. Diplomacy? Yeah, humility is the word I'm looking for. You don't get down on your knees in front of somebody proud. You just don't. Phyllis?
You know, in the blessing, when Isaac was blessing, he told Esau, you'll become restless and break the yoke of your brother.
Yeah, but I don't think that's what's happening here yet. Okay? Suzanne?
I think, too, that Jacob's gotten a taste of what it felt like what he did to
Yeah.
He was really bad about it.
Oh, I think you're exactly right. There is humility here that wasn't there before. And it's ironic because it's supposed to be the other way around. And in the big picture, it will be. Okay? Israel will, for the most part, throughout the Bible story, dominate Edom until later in the Old Testament. And that's when I think the yoke is broken, Phyllis. But at this point, the irony is, out of humility, and this is trusting God. I'm going to bow down before my brother. So he sends the gifts. Esau refuses the gifts. One other thing I want you to know is look at verse 11. How does Jacob describe the gifts that he sends to Esau? What word does he use? In chapter 33 and verse 11. Please take my blessing that is brought to you because God has dealt graciously. That's the same word for blessing that Isaac bestowed upon Jacob that he stole from Esau by deceit. And it's interesting to me that Jacob's going, look, I took your blessing, but look at all this prosperity that I'm offering to you as a blessing. So, Isaac basically told Esau, I don't have anything for you. You're going to get what you get by your own sword. Jacob gets all the prosperity. But Jacob at some point comes back and offers it to Isaac. Once again, just very ironic to me. Moving ahead very quickly, where does Jacob end up settling? There's really two answers to this. Where does he settle first? Okay, at Sukkoth, which is, if we were back at Menahem, and then Peniel is right there on the Jabbok, Sukkoth is in the same area as Peniel. Okay, I'm sure I'm not saying that correctly. And what he does is he builds a house and he builds pens for his cattle as if to do what? To settle there. Why do you think he does that? What is he still afraid of, folks? Huh? Yeah, I think he's still afraid of Esau. You know, it's all hunky-dory when we had this meeting right here. But what happens when we're close to one another day in and day out, and you have a bad day, and you get drunk, and you got to thinking about all I did to you, and you get your 400 men to come over and kill me? I still think Jacob is hesitant. So he stays there for a while. Then you get to verse 18, and where else does he try to settle? At Shechem. Shechem is actually in the promised land. You see it on the map here. It's not all the way to Bethel. What does he do at Shechem? That's very significant. He bought a piece of land, okay? And this is the only other land, so far as we know of, that the children of Israel, that the patriarchs owned in the promised land. We think of the cave of Machpelah, but Jacob buys this piece of property. Why would he do that? What do you think his intention is? Yeah, I'm going to stay here. Where has God already told him to go? Huh? We told him to go home, but there is a place that God wants him to go first. What's the city that God tells him, actually more than once, to go to? Where did God first make a promise to him to take care of him? In Bethel. Okay, that's where God wants him to go. But he stays at Shechem. And we're going to learn Wednesday night, we're going to talk about the problem that he has in Shechem. But he buys some land there. He builds an altar there. All of which says to me he has plans perhaps to settle there. But as you skip over then to chapter 35, God appears to him again and tells him to go to Bethel and dwell there and make an altar there. And so the question is, why is that special? And I've already answered that. Because that's where the initial kind of agreement was. God said, I'm going to take care of you. God gives him the blessing of the promise, of the Abrahamic promise, land, seed, and nation. And he gave it to him at Bethel, and he told him to come back here. And Jacob's reply was, if you bring me back here, I'll make you my God. And so it's almost as if God's saying, look, you haven't done your part yet. I've been doing my part, but you haven't done your part yet. You go back there. That's where I want you to go. And so when he goes back there, Jacob is going to kind of renew this pledge. What does Jacob ask of his family before he goes back there? Put away your idols and cleanse yourselves. Yeah, change your clothes. And so they take the idols and the earrings, which maybe that was indicative of the God that they served. And they bury him under an oak tree there at Shechem before they leave town, and they leave that behind them. Let me ask you this as we're finishing, and we'll pick up with these last one or two questions as we go into the next lesson. What does that tell you about Rachel and Leah and Bilhah and Zilpah? They were pagans. They weren't worshipers of Yahweh. And one of the things that we're going to see and that we're going to emphasize just kind of as, well, I guess it'll be next Sunday because Wednesday's singing, is Jacob's sons are not very godly men, are they? You know, we're going to see some real perplexing actions out of these guys in the next few chapters and all the way into the end of the book. And it's easy to assume, and I think this is part of it, that the reason for their immorality, their impropriety, is because as young people they're growing up amidst the Canaanites. And there is some truth to that. But we also see this family maintaining some isolation. What's the biggest influence in a young person's life up to the time they're maybe 10, 11, 12 years old? Their parents. And you've got mothers who are idolatrous, who have been at each other's throats at times, who have offered immoral solutions to their own frustrations about having children and about who their husband loved the most, who have stolen from their father, who feel like they've been mistreated by their father. What kind of influence do you think those women had on the sons of Jacob? And so that's an interesting element in the story of the patriarchs that probably we don't give very much attention to. And I'm not sure what all to make of it other than this. You know, God's people who have learned faith haven't always been very good people. That doesn't mean they can't learn faith and change. But you know, Abraham starts off as a pagan. Isaac at times doesn't always seem like he's really faithful to God. Jacob is out there. And Jacob's sons are ungodly people, and yet God uses them, God cares for them, and at least the patriarchs learn some faith in God. And Joseph certainly learns that. And so there's a lesson there for us about God, about how God works, about God's patience, about God's love, about faith being something that changes us as we go along. So think about those things as we start getting ready for the next lesson, which will be next Sunday. Okay? Thank you for your comments.